Oh. Clara Whitmore hadn't eaten in 5 days. Her body trembled outside the last open store in Cedar Hollow, holding out rusted coins for bread. Everyone turned away like she was diseased. Her knees buckled. The door swung open. A tall man stepped through, cold face, wounded eyes. He saw Clara collapsed on the steps, stopped dead, then spoke 4 words that made the entire room go silent. "Pack your things. You're coming home." A stranger saving another stranger. But why? The stranger didn't wait for an answer. He stepped past Clara's crumpled body on the steps and walked straight to the counter. The shopkeeper, a balding man named Morris, who'd known Clara since she was a girl, pretended to organize canned goods on a shelf. "I need flour, rice, bread, whatever meat you've got." Morris glanced at this tall man, then at Clara outside. His hands moved slower. "That'll be $13. The stranger pulled out a worn leather wallet and counted bills onto the counter. Morris bagged the items without meeting his eyes. Everyone in the store watched. No one moved. Clara could see them through the glass door. Shadows of people who used to greet her on Sundays, who used to smile when she walked past. Now they looked at her like something contagious. The stranger picked up 2 bags and pushed the door open with his shoulder. He stood over Clara, up close. She could see the lines around his eyes. Exhaustion, grief, something familiar. "Pack your things," he said again. "You're coming home." Clara's throat worked, but no sound came. It had been 6 months since she'd spoken more than a whisper. 6 months since she'd run from Walter Briggs in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on her back. 6 months of sleeping in abandoned barns and washing in creeks and avoiding every person she'd ever known because Walter owned this town the way some men owned land. Completely without question. The stranger extended his hand. Clara stared at it. She didn't know this man. Didn't know why he'd speak to her when everyone else crossed the street to avoid her. Didn't know what he wanted. But her body was shutting down. 5 days without food had turned her vision spotty and her legs useless. She took his hand. He pulled her up easily. She weighed nothing anymore. "Can you walk?" Clara nodded. Barely. He started down the street and she followed because there was nothing else to do. The truck was old, forest green, the bed filled with lumber and tools. He opened the passenger door and she climbed in. The seat was cracked leather, warmed by the winter sun. She pulled her threadbare coat tighter. He drove in silence. Clara watched the town roll past the church where she'd married Walter 7 years ago. The diner where he'd first hit her across the face for smiling at the waiter. The intersection where she'd finally understood she would die if she stayed. Cedar Hollow looked the same as it always had. White clappered houses, bare trees, snow gathering in the corners of everything. "Do you have anywhere to go?" the stranger asked. Clara shook her head. He nodded once. "Then stay. My house needs someone to clean." That was all. No questions about where she'd been, no demands for explanations, no judgment in his voice, just a statement of fact. They turned onto a gravel road that led into the woods. The houses grew farther apart. The truck climbed a hill and stopped in front of a 2-story cabin made of dark wood. Smoke drifted from the chimney. A small bicycle lay on its side in the yard. "I have a son," the man said. "He's 7. He's quiet. Won't bother you." Clara nodded again. Words felt impossible. Her throat had closed up months ago, and she didn't know how to open it. They got out. He carried the groceries, and she followed him up the porch steps. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the house was warm. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Wooden furniture, all handmade. Photographs on the mantel. A woman's face appeared in most of them. Dark hair, bright smile, holding a baby. The same woman in a wedding dress. The same woman laughing in a kitchen. A boy sat at the dining table coloring. He looked up when they entered. His eyes, the same storm gray as the stranger's, moved from his father to Clara and back again. "We have a guest. The man said she'll be staying with us." The boy didn't ask why. He just nodded and returned to his drawing. The man set the groceries on the counter and turned to Clara. "My name is Jacob Callahan. This is my son. Upstairs. Second door on the right. That's a spare room. You can use it." Clara wanted to say thank you, wanted to ask why he was doing this, wanted to know what he expected in return, but her voice stayed buried, and Jacob didn't seem to need answers. "There's a bathroom at the end of the hall, towels in the cabinet. I'll make something to eat." She climbed the stairs slowly. Every step felt like lifting stone. The second door opened to a small bedroom with a single bed, a wooden dresser, a window that looked out over the forest. The walls were pale blue. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. Handmade, careful stitches. Women's clothes still hung in the closet. A hairbrush sat on the dresser. Strands of dark hair caught in the bristles. This had been his wife's room. Clara sank onto the bed. The mattress gave under her weight. Soft, clean, safe. The word felt foreign. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe. With Walter, there had only been waiting for his mood to sour, waiting for his fists, waiting for the moment he'd finally kill her. She'd run because staying meant dying, but running had nearly killed her anyway. Footsteps on the stairs. Jacob appeared in the doorway holding a plate. Bread, cheese, sliced apple, a glass of water. "Start slow," he said. "Your stomach won't handle much." He set the plate on the dresser and left without another word. Clara stared at the food. Her hands shook as she picked up the bread. The first bite tasted like resurrection. She ate slowly, the way Jacob had told her. Each swallow hurt. Her body had forgotten how to process anything solid. But she finished it all and drank the water and felt something like strength return to her limbs. She lay back on the bed. The ceiling had a water stain in the corner. The window let in gray winter light. Outside, she could hear Jacob's voice, low and steady, reading something to his son, a story. She closed her eyes and listened. For 6 months, she'd been nothing, a ghost, a woman without a name, without a voice, without a future. People in Cedar Hollow whispered about her, Briggs's wife, who'd gone crazy and run off. Some said she'd killed herself in the woods. Others said she was living rough, trading herself for food. No one came looking. No one cared. Walter had made sure of that. He'd spent 3 years isolating her, turning her friends away, convincing her family she was unstable, breaking her down piece by piece until she believed she deserved everything he did to her, until she stopped fighting back, until she stopped speaking. The first time he hit her was 2 months after the wedding. She'd burned dinner. He'd apologized afterward, crying, swearing it would never happen again. But it did, again and again, until apologies stopped, and only the hitting remained. She'd tried to leave once before. He'd found her at the bus station, dragged her home, locked her in the bedroom for a week, when he finally let her out. He'd smiled and told her she was free to go any time. But everyone in town worked for him, or owed him. No one would help her. No one would hide her. So, she'd waited, planned, and one night when he had passed out drunk, she'd walked out the door and kept walking. Now she was here in a stranger's house, in a dead woman's room, and she still didn't understand why Jacob Callahan had stopped for her when everyone else had turned away. Downstairs. The front door opened and closed. Jacob's footsteps crossed the floor. Water ran in the kitchen. The house settled into evening quiet. Clara pulled the quilt over herself. It smelled like cedar and lavender, like someone had loved it once. She thought about the photographs downstairs. The woman with the bright smile, Jacob's wife, the boy's mother. Dead just like Clara had almost been. She wondered how the woman had died. Wondered if Jacob had held her at the end. Wondered if that's why he'd seen Clara on those steps and couldn't walk past. Because he knew what it looked like when someone was slipping away. Clara turned onto her side, through the window. Darkness crept through the trees. Snow began to fall, soft silent. She watched it gather on the sill and felt her eyes grow heavy. For the first time in 6 months, she let herself sleep without fear. Downstairs, Jacob sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. His son had gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the fire and the wind outside. He'd meant to go straight home from the lumber yard, meant to pick up groceries and get back before dark. He hadn't meant to stop at Morris's store, hadn't meant to see the woman collapsed on the steps. But he had. And the moment he saw her, skeletal, shaking, eyes full of the kind of desperation he'd seen in his wife's face during her last days, something in him broke open. He couldn't leave her, couldn't walk past, couldn't pretend he hadn't seen. So he'd brought her home to the house where his wife had died 2 years ago, to the room where she'd spent her final months, too weak to leave the bed. Jacob didn't know the woman's name, didn't know her story, but he knew what it looked like when someone had nothing left. He knew because he'd watched his wife slip away despite everything he'd tried, despite the doctors and the prayers and the desperate, useless hope. He knew because he'd been there, too, in the months after she died, when getting out of bed felt impossible, and his son's face reminded him of everything he'd lost. He'd survived. Barely. Maybe that's all he could offer this stranger. A chance to survive. Jacob stood and locked the front door, checked the windows, banked the fire. Upstairs. He looked in on his son asleep, curled around a stuffed bear his mother had made. Then he stopped outside the spare room. The door was cracked open. Inside, the woman lay motionless under the quilt, breathing, alive. Jacob pulled the door closed and went to his own room. Tomorrow he'd figure out what came next. Tonight he'd done the only thing he could. He'd brought someone home. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Morning light cut through the window. She'd slept through the night without waking once. A miracle she hadn't experienced in years. Her body ached less. The fog in her head had lifted slightly. Downstairs, she could hear Jacob moving around the kitchen. The clatter of dishes, water running. His son's voice asking something too quiet to make out. She sat up slowly. The quilt had tangled around her legs, on the dresser. The empty plate from last night sat where she'd left it. She picked it up and carried it downstairs. Jacob stood at the stove, flipping eggs. His son sat at the table eating toast. They both looked up when Clara appeared. She set the plate on the counter and stepped back, waiting for instructions, waiting to be told what was expected of her. Jacob glanced at the plate, then at Clara. "You don't have to do that," he said. But Clara picked up the dish towel anyway and started washing. It was the only way she knew how to repay kindness, with work, with usefulness. If she wasn't useful, she had no reason to stay. Jacob didn't argue. He finished cooking and set a plate of eggs and toast on the table. Clara sat and ate while Jacob poured coffee. His son watched her with open curiosity but didn't speak. The silence felt different from the one she'd grown used to. Not hostile, just careful. After breakfast, Jacob left for work. He built furniture in a workshop behind the house, tables and chairs and cabinets that he sold to a store in the next town over. Clara watched him walk across the yard carrying his thermos and tool belt. His son went with him, dragging a wooden toy truck. Clara spent the morning cleaning. She washed dishes and swept floors and wiped down counters. The house wasn't dirty, but it carried the loneliness of a man raising a child alone. Laundry piled in the corner. Dust gathered on the windowsills. The bathroom sink had a slow leak. She worked until her arms hurt, until the house smelled like lemon soap and looked the way she imagined it had when Jacob's wife was alive. Then she sat at the kitchen table, exhausted, and stared at her hands. She wanted to thank Jacob, wanted to ask why he'd helped her, wanted to explain who she was and where she'd come from, but her throat stayed locked. The words lived somewhere inside her, buried so deep she couldn't reach them. That night, Jacob came in covered in sawdust. He stopped in the doorway and looked around at the clean house. His expression changed. Grief passed over his face, then gratitude. He didn't say anything, just nodded once and went upstairs to shower. The pattern continued. Days bled into each other. Clara cleaned and cooked and tried to make herself small enough not to be a burden. Jacob worked and came home and kept a careful distance. His son left toys outside Clara's door: a wooden horse, a carved bird, a handful of smooth river stones, but never knocked, never spoke. 3 weeks in, Clara found a notepad in a kitchen drawer. She tore out a page and wrote 2 words in careful print. "Thank you." She left it on the table where Jacob would see it. The next morning, a reply sat beside her breakfast plate. Jacob's handwriting was blocky and practical. "Don't need to." Clara picked up the pen and wrote beneath his words. "Can I stay longer?" His response came that evening. "Stay as long as you want." Something loosened in Clara's chest. She wrote, "What do you need me to do?" Jacob wrote back, "Nothing, just rest." But Clara couldn't rest. Resting meant thinking. Thinking meant remembering. So, she scrubbed and organized and mended the curtains that had come loose from their rods. She learned the rhythm of Jacob's house. When he woke, when his son needed lunch, when the fire needed stoking. She made herself necessary because necessary meant safe. A month passed. Then another. Clara's body regained some of its strength. Her hair grew longer. The hollows under her eyes began to fill in, but her voice stayed buried. One afternoon, Jacob came home from town with flour and sugar and a 10-pound sack of potatoes over his shoulder. He unpacked the groceries without looking at Clara. She wrote on the notepad, "Something wrong?" Jacob read it. His jaw tightened. He picked up the pen and wrote, "People talking about you, about me." Clara's hands went cold. She wrote, "What are they saying?" Jacob's reply came slowly. "That Briggs is looking for you, that you're his wife, that I'm interfering." Clara stared at the words. Of course. Walter was looking. He'd never let her go. She was his property he'd purchased with a ring and a marriage license. The thought of him finding her here in this safe place made her stomach turn. She wrote, "I should leave." Jacob's pen moved fast, almost angry. "No!" Clara looked up at him. He met her eyes and she saw something there she hadn't expected. Determination, stubbornness. The same look he got when he was sanding a piece of wood that wouldn't smooth. He wrote again, "You're not going anywhere." That night, Clara lay in bed, listening to the wind outside. She thought about Walter, about the way he smiled when he hurt her, the way he apologized and cried and swore he'd change, then did it again, the way he'd convinced everyone in Cedar Hollow that she was the problem, unstable, ungrateful, crazy. She thought about Jacob, about the way he moved through his grief like a man walking through deep water, about the photographs on the mantel, about his son who left her gifts but never came close. She didn't understand why Jacob was protecting her, didn't understand what he wanted. Men always wanted something, but Jacob only wanted her to stay. 2 months became 3. Winter deepened. Snow piled against the house, and Clara learned to split kindling and carry firewood. Jacob's son started sitting closer to her at meals. One morning, he showed her a drawing he'd made, a house with 3 stick figures standing in front. Clara pointed at the smallest figure and raised her eyebrows in question. The boy nodded. "That's me." He pointed at the tallest figure. "That's Dad." Then he pointed at the 3rd figure, a woman with yellow hair. "That's you." Clara's throat tightened. She touched the drawing gently and the boy smiled. Then he ran off to play, leaving the picture on the table. That night, the boy woke screaming. Clara heard it from her room. Raw, terrified, sobbing. She ran down the hall in her nightgown and found him sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his face. "Mom," he gasped. "Mom was gone. She was gone, and I couldn't find her." Clara climbed onto the bed and pulled him close. His small body shook against hers. She rocked him the way her own mother had rocked her once, before Walter had driven her family away. "It's okay," Clara whispered. "It's okay." The words came out broken and rough, but they came. Footsteps in the hall. Jacob appeared in the doorway, frozen. Clara looked up and saw shock on his face. She'd spoken. For the first time in 6 months, she'd spoken. Jacob didn't move, didn't breathe. His son's crying had quieted to hiccups. Clara kept rocking him, kept whispering reassurances, and Jacob watched like he was seeing something impossible. When the boy finally fell back asleep, Clara laid him down and tucked the blanket around him. She stood and walked past Jacob into the hall. He followed her downstairs. In the kitchen, they faced each other across the table. "You spoke," Jacob said. Clara nodded, her hands twisted together. "Can you speak now, or was it just—" Clara opened her mouth, tested her voice. I don't know." The words felt like glass, sharp, painful, but real. Jacob sat down heavily. "What happened to you?" Clara sat across from him. She wanted to tell him everything. The years with Walter, the fear, the escape, but the words wouldn't come in order. They came in fragments. "My husband," she managed. "He hurt me." Jacob's expression darkened. "Briggs." Clara nodded. "I ran. 6 months ago. I've been hiding. Why didn't you go to the police?" Clara almost laughed. The sound came out broken. "He owns the police, owns the town. No one would help me." Jacob leaned forward. "I'll help you." "Why?" The question burst out of her. "Why are you doing this?" Jacob didn't answer right away. He looked at the photographs on the mantel, his wife's face smiling back at them both. "Because I know what it looks like when someone's drowning," he finally said. "And I couldn't save her. But maybe I can save you." Clara felt tears on her face. She wiped them away roughly. "Your wife," she whispered. "How did she—" Jacob's hands curled into fists. "Cancer started in her lungs. Spread everywhere. Doctors tried everything. Nothing worked. She died in that room upstairs while I sat there and watched and couldn't do a damn thing about it." Clara reached across the table. Her hand covered his. "It wasn't your fault." Jacob looked at her like she'd struck him, like no one had ever said those words before. His eyes went bright with unshed tears. "Everyone says that," he said quietly. "But it feels like it was." They sat in silence. Clara's hand stayed on his. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Days passed. Clara's voice came back in pieces. Short sentences, whispered conversations. She talked to Jacob's son about his drawings, asked Jacob about his work. The words felt strange in her mouth, like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. One afternoon, Jacob climbed onto the roof to fix a leak. Clara followed him up the ladder. They worked side by side, replacing shingles while clouds built on the horizon. "I never asked your name," Jacob said suddenly. "Your real name, not just Briggs's wife." "Clara," she said. "Clara Whitmore." "Clara," Jacob repeated. "Testing it. That suits you better." They finished the roof as the first drops of rain began to fall, climbing down. Jacob slipped on a wet rung. Clara grabbed his arm and steadied him. They ended up face to face on the ladder, breathing hard, rainwater running down their faces. Jacob looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're not afraid of me?" "No," Clara said. "I'm not." "Why not? After everything you've been through. Because you're not him," Clara said simply. The air between them changed. Jacob's hand came up and brushed wet hair from Clara's face. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just looked at him and felt her heart beat faster. Then the moment broke. Jacob climbed down and Clara followed, and they went inside without speaking. That night, Clara heard Jacob reading to his son. The door was cracked open. She stood in the hallway and listened. "And the knight saved the princess," Jacob read. "And they lived happily ever after. The end." His son's voice. "Dad, do you think you'll get married again?" Silence. Then Jacob. Carefully. "I don't know. Buddy, maybe. I think Clara would be a good mom. Clara's a friend. She's been through a lot. We have to be gentle with her. But you like her. I can tell." Jacob's voice dropped so low Clara almost couldn't hear it. "Yeah, I like her. Maybe more than I should." Clara's breath caught. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself. Jacob continued reading, but Clara couldn't focus on the words. She went back to her room and sat on the bed, her heart racing. She liked Jacob, too, more than she should, more than was safe. But liking someone and trusting them were different things. And Clara's trust had been broken so thoroughly, she didn't know if she'd ever get it back. The next evening, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. Jacob's son was inside drawing. The air smelled like pine and coming snow. "Can I ask you something?" Jacob said. Clara nodded. "Briggs, did he ever talk about his family, his past?" Clara's hands tightened on the porch railing. She hadn't thought about this in months, hadn't wanted to remember. But Jacob deserved to know. "Once," she said quietly, "early on, before everything got bad." Jacob waited. "He told me about his mother." Clara continued. Her voice was steady now, growing stronger each day. How his father used to beat her. How Walter would hide in the closet and listen to her crying. How she never fought back, never left. Just took it until one day she died. Walter was 12. Jacob's jaw tightened. "He cried when he told me. Clara said he'd hated his father for what he did. Swore he'd never be like that. Never raise his hand to a woman." She laughed bitterly. 2 months later, he hit me for the first time. I reminded him of what he'd said. He just looked at me like I was crazy, like it had never happened. He became his father. Jacob said worse, because he knew better, because he'd lived through it. But he did it anyway. Clara's voice cracked. His mother used to go silent. That's what he said. She'd stopped talking when his father got violent, just disappeared inside herself. I didn't understand what he meant until I did the same thing. Jacob reached over and took her hand. "You're not her. And you got out. That took more strength than anything." Clara looked at their joined hands. "I don't feel strong." "You are," Jacob said. "Stronger than you know." They sat in the growing darkness, holding hands, not speaking. And Clara felt something shift inside her. Not fear this time. Something else. Something that felt like hope. A week later, Briggs came. Clara was in the kitchen when she heard the truck pull up outside. She looked through the window and her blood went cold. Walter's black pickup. 2 other men with him. Jacob was in the workshop. His son was playing in the yard. The knock came hard and sharp. Clara stood frozen, unable to move. Jacob appeared from around the side of the house, saw the truck, and his whole body went rigid. He walked to the front door and opened it before Briggs could knock again. "I heard my wife is here," Briggs said. His voice was calm, friendly, the same voice he used when convincing people he was a good man. Jacob blocked the doorway. "She's not your wife anymore." "Actually, she is. We haven't divorced. She still has my name." Briggs smiled. "I just want to talk to her." "No." Briggs's smile thinned. "Callahan, I don't think you understand the situation." Clara is confused. She's been through a lot. She needs to come home where she belongs. Behind Jacob. Clara appeared in the hallway. Briggs's eyes locked on her and his expression shifted. Something possessive. Hungry. "Clara, sweetheart, I've been so worried. Come on now. Let's go home. Clara shook her head. The movement was tiny but definite. Briggs's jaw tightened. Clara, come here now. Jacob took a step forward, forcing Briggs back. She said no. Time for you to leave. You don't know what you're doing, Briggs said, his voice hardening. In this town. Jacob slammed the door in his face. Silence. Then the sound of Briggs's truck starting, driving away. Jacob turned and found Clara standing there, white-faced and shaking. He crossed to her and she collapsed against him. He held her while she trembled. He'll come back, Clara whispered. I know, Jacob said. That night, Clara wrote on the notepad. I have to leave. He'll hurt you, Jacob wrote back. I won't let anyone drive you away. He took her hand, the first time they'd touched deliberately. Clara looked down at their joined hands and felt something crack open inside her chest. I'm afraid, she whispered. Me, too, Jacob said, but he didn't let go. 48 hours later, Clara was alone in the house. Jacob had gone to deliver furniture. His son was at school. She was folding laundry when she heard the door crash open. Briggs stood in the living room, breathing hard. Clara ran. She made it to the stairs before he caught her, dragging her back by her hair. She screamed, but there was no one to hear. You think you can leave me? Briggs shouted. You think some backwoods carpenter can protect you? You belong to me. He threw her against the wall. Clara's head cracked against the corner and the world spun. She crawled toward the closet, trying to hide, but Briggs hauled her out. The front door banged open. Jacob's son ran in from the school bus and saw them. He screamed. Briggs shoved the boy aside. The child hit the floor hard and started crying. Clara found her voice, full and strong and furious. Don't touch him. The sound of tires on gravel. Jacob's truck. He burst through the door and saw Clara bleeding, saw his son on the floor, saw Briggs standing over them both. Something broke in Jacob's eyes. He hit Briggs so hard the man went down. Then he was on top of him, fists swinging, making sounds that weren't quite words. Briggs tried to fight back, but Jacob was beyond reason. He was going to kill him. Clara pulled herself up and grabbed Jacob from behind, wrapping her arms around him. Jacob, stop. Please stop. Don't do this. Her voice cut through. Jacob froze, fist raised. He looked down at Briggs, bloodied, gasping, and slowly let him go. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called them. Briggs was arrested. Jacob gave a statement. Clara couldn't speak. She sat on the porch steps with Jacob's son in her lap, both of them shaking. After the police left, Jacob sat beside her, blood on his knuckles, sawdust in his hair. He looked at her and she looked back, and the wall between them finally shattered. I almost lost you, Jacob said. Clara touched his face. You're the first person who made me want to live again. Jacob kissed her. Clara kissed back. It tasted like desperation and hope and everything broken trying to mend. 2 days later, Briggs was released, lack of evidence. Clara, too, afraid to testify. The boy too young. Briggs had friends in the department. A message came that night, left on Jacob's truck windshield. I'll take back what's mine. Clara read it and knew. This wasn't over, not even close. The night it happened, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the bed that had once belonged to Jacob's wife and stared at the ceiling, listening. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like a door opening. Jacob had installed new locks, checked the windows twice before bed. But locks wouldn't stop Walter Briggs. Nothing had ever stopped him before. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Clara heard it, the soft scrape of metal on metal, someone picking the back door lock. She was out of bed instantly, running down the hall to Jacob's room. She shook him awake and pressed her hand over his mouth before he could speak. He understood immediately. His eyes went hard. They moved to his son's room. Jacob scooped the boy up, still sleeping, and carried him downstairs to the basement. Clara followed. The basement was cold and smelled like earth and old wood. Jacob set his son down on an old couch in the corner and covered him with a blanket. "Stay here," Jacob whispered to Clara. "Don't come up no matter what you hear." Clara grabbed his arm. "Don't go, please." Jacob touched her face. "I have to end this." He kissed her once, hard and desperate, then climbed the stairs. Clara heard the basement door close. The lock clicked. She stood in the darkness with Jacob's son still sleeping and pressed her fist against her mouth to keep from screaming. Upstairs, Jacob found Briggs standing in the living room. The man held a pistol loosely at his side. Not aimed. Not yet. Just there. A promise. "Callahan," Briggs said. His voice was steady. Too steady. "We need to talk." Jacob stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "There's nothing to say. Leave." Briggs shook his head. "I can't do that. Clara is my wife. She belongs with me. She's not property. You don't understand." Briggs's hand tightened on the gun. "I love her. I've always loved her. Since the day I met her. She was mine. Mine to protect. Mine to care for. Mine." Jacob took a step forward. "You don't love her. You broke her. I made mistakes," Briggs said. "I know that, but I can change. I can be better. If she just comes back." "She's not coming back." Briggs raised the gun, not pointing it at Jacob, just raising it. His hand shook. "Then I'll take her," Briggs said quietly. "And if you try to stop me, I'll kill you and that boy down there. And then myself, because if I can't have her, nobody can." Jacob didn't move. He looked at Briggs, really looked at him, saw the desperation, the madness, the pain underneath everything else. "Your father used to beat your mother?" Jacob said. Briggs froze. Jacob continued, his voice calm. "Clara told me," she said. "You talked about it once, how your mother never fought back, how she just took it until the day she died, how you hated your father for that." Briggs's face twisted. "Don't talk about my mother. You loved her," Jacob said. "You watched him hurt her, and you couldn't stop it. You were just a kid, and when she died, you swore you'd never be like him." The gun wavered. "But you are like him," Jacob said. "You're exactly like him." "Shut up." "Clara was silent for 6 months because of what you did to her." 6 months. She couldn't speak because you terrified her so completely she lost her voice, just like your mother. Briggs made a sound between a sob and a scream. "I didn't. I never meant." "You did," Jacob said. "You hurt the woman you claimed to love until she couldn't even say your name. You made her afraid to exist. That's what your father did, and that's what you became." The gun dropped slightly. Briggs's eyes were wild. "I'm not him." Briggs said, "I'm not. I loved Clara. I wanted to protect her. Protect her from what? From having her own thoughts, her own choices. That's not protection. That's control." Jacob took another step closer. "You don't love Clara. You love owning her. There's a difference." Briggs's knees buckled. He sat down hard on the couch, the gun now hanging forgotten in his hand. His shoulders shook. "I don't know how to stop," Briggs whispered. Jacob sat across from him, close enough to be dangerous, close enough to be honest. "You start by letting her go," Jacob said. "You let her live her life. You leave this town, you get help, real help. She'll never forgive me. Probably not. But that's not why you do it. You do it because it's right. You do it because you're better than your father. You do it because you want to break the cycle instead of passing it on." Briggs looked at the gun in his hand like he'd forgotten it was there. Slowly, he set it on the coffee table, pushed it toward Jacob. "I saw her happy with you," Briggs said. His voice cracked through the window. "She was laughing. I hadn't seen her laugh in years." Jacob picked up the gun and unloaded it. set the bullets in his pocket. You could have that, too, Jacob said. Not with Clara. She's done. But somewhere else. With someone new. If you get help, if you do the work. Briggs put his head in his hands. His whole body shook with sobs. I'm so tired. I know. They sat in silence. The fire had burned down to embers. Outside, the first birds started singing. Dawn was coming. Finally, Briggs stood. He looked at Jacob with red, swollen eyes. Take care of her, Briggs said. Jacob nodded. I will. Better than I did. That won't be hard. Briggs almost smiled. Then he walked to the door and left. Jacob watched through the window as Briggs climbed into his truck and drove away, down the gravel road, through the woods, gone. Jacob sat on the couch for a long time, holding the empty gun. Then he went to the basement and unlocked the door. Clara stood at the bottom of the stairs, white-faced. He's gone. Clara climbed the stairs and walked into Jacob's arms. He held her while she cried. Not from fear this time, from relief, from exhaustion, from the weight of everything finally lifting. Jacob's son appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. Is it over? Jacob looked at Clara. She looked back. Yeah, Jacob said. It's over. 3 days later, they heard Briggs had left Cedar Hollow, sold his sawmill to someone from out of town, moved to the city. The rumors said he'd checked into some kind of treatment facility, that he was trying to get his head straight. Clara didn't know if it was true, didn't know if Briggs would stay gone, but for the first time in years, she could breathe without fear. Winter gave way to spring. The snow melted and wildflowers pushed through the mud. Clara planted a garden behind the house. Tomatoes and beans and herbs. Jacob's son helped her dig holes and place seeds. They worked together in the warm sun. And Clara felt something like peace settle into her bones. One evening, Jacob found her on the porch watching the sunset. He sat beside her and took her hand. Marry me, he said. Clara turned to look at him. What? Marry me. Not because you need protection, not because you owe me. Because I love you and you love me, and I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Yes, they married on a Saturday in late May. The ceremony was in the garden Clara had planted. No church, no crowd, just a justice of the peace, Jacob's son, and 2 neighbors as witnesses. Clara wore a simple white dress she'd bought in the next town over. Not fancy, not expensive, just hers. Jacob wore the same suit he'd worn to his first wedding, but it felt different now. Not haunted, just lived in. The justice of the peace asked if they'd written their own vows. Jacob looked at Clara, and she nodded. Jacob spoke first. I promise to love you without trying to control you, without fear, without holding so tight I hurt you. Just love, real love, every day. Clara's turn. Her voice was strong and clear. I promise to stay, not to run, not to be silent when I'm hurt. To trust you, to build a life with you. Just love, real love, every day. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands Jacob had made himself in his workshop. Then they kissed, and Jacob's son cheered and threw handfuls of flower petals he'd been collecting all morning. That night, after the boy was in bed, Clara and Jacob stood on the porch together. The stars were out. The air smelled like honeysuckle and fresh earth. Thank you, Clara said, for saying those 4 words. Jacob smiled. Pack your things. Clara turned and kissed him. You're coming home. You are home, Jacob said. Clara rested her head on his shoulder and looked out at the woods. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The trees rustled. The world felt big and open and full of possibility. She thought about how close she'd come to dying outside that store. How Jacob could have walked past. How Briggs could have destroyed them all. But he hadn't. Jacob had stopped, had seen her, had refused to look away. She thought about Walter Briggs, hoped he'd found help, hoped he'd break the cycle he'd been born into, hoped he'd learn what love actually meant, but mostly. She thought about Jacob, about the way he'd given her space to heal, about the way he'd protected her without controlling her, about the way he looked at her like she was whole, not broken. "I never thought I'd be happy again," Clara said quietly. Jacob kissed the top of her head. "Me neither. But we are. Yeah, we are." They stood together until the stars multiplied overhead and the night grew cold. Then they went inside to the house that had saved them both. Jacob locked the door behind them and checked the windows out of habit. But the fear was gone. Only safety remained. Upstairs. Clara looked in on Jacob's son. The boy was asleep, tangled in his blankets, a smile on his face. She straightened his covers and kissed his forehead. He'd started calling her Clara Mom. Not just Clara. Clara Mom. Like she'd always been there. In their bedroom. No longer just Jacob's, but theirs. Clara changed into a nightgown and climbed into bed. Jacob joined her. They lay facing each other in the darkness. "Do you think he'll come back?" Clara whispered. "Briggs." "No," Jacob said. "I don't." "How do you know?" "Because he looked broken when he left. Really broken. The kind of broken that either kills you or forces you to rebuild yourself completely, and I think he chose to rebuild." Clara hoped that was true. Hoped Briggs would find whatever he needed to become the man he'd wanted to be instead of the man his father had made him. But even if he didn't, she knew she'd be okay because she had Jacob, and Jacob's son, and this house in the woods, and a voice that worked, and a future that belonged to her. "I love you," Clara said. Jacob pulled her close. "I love you, too." They fell asleep, wrapped around each other, outside. The wind moved through the trees. Inside, 3 people who'd been broken found wholeness. Not because someone had fixed them, but because they'd chosen to heal.